This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux in Laws, Season 2, Episode 14. Martin, how is the world treating you these days?
It's pretty much as usual. A bunch of wars, stuff like that. Weather events. What more do you need? Yeah.
So is the Ukraine involved in any of these wars you keep talking about?
Of course, yeah.
Which ones? Just trade wars or real ones?
No, just all of them, really.
All of them?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
As in the king himself, or just his subjects?
Well, just politicians, really.
Politicians.
And various arms dealers, I'm sure, and people like that. But,
okay. But
yeah.
this is not a podcast about the UK war situation.
No, it's about
funny enough.
sea life, isn't it?
But yeah, no, Martin, you're not too far off. But actually, about open source software. So with that, I would like to welcome our guests, Alan Wyma and Marco Otto-Witte. And before I butcher these names even more, why don't you introduce yourself, gentlemen?
Yeah, Marco, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Marco Otto-Witte. I'm in Munich, Germany. I'm founder of Main Matter. We're a consultancy. We do Rust consulting, Rust teaching, Rust team reinforcement, and so on. And happy to be here.
Alan.
Yep. So I'm Alan Wyma. I run an interview series on the Rustacean Station podcast. I'm also doing my own consulting work. We're doing Elixir, Flutter, and Rust, all three of those technologies. And yep.
And the reason, and the two of them already mentioned this, the reason why we have them today on the show. And as we all know, Linux in Laws is just on the surface, it's just an open source podcast about open source technologies, but under the surface is actually a Rust marketing podcast. So with that, we decided to have one of the longest standing Rust podcasts on the show as a guest. And this is actually Alan's, I think it's fair to say, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, that you instantiated the whole thing about 27 years ago, before Rust was even kind of dreamt of, right?
Yeah, I saw the trend coming, So obviously,
excellent. No, jokes aside, Rustacean Station has been in existence half a year longer than something called the Linux in Laws. But with that, Alan, why don't you shed some more light on the history of this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, where do we start, right? So you want to know about my involvement with the podcast? Is that right?
Why don't you describe a little bit about your Rust journey? You mentioned some really fancy hipster technologies already. Maybe you can.
Yeah.
And maybe you can, before Marco does the same, maybe you can kind of describe how you arrived at Rust and why did you set up a podcast and whatever has happened since.
Oh, you're putting a lot of questions into one section. So let me think of how I can cohese this together.
We have about 4 hours, so that should be plenty.
All right. Wow. So my Rust journey. I mean, I started off learning C++ in university, or as we call it, college, where I'm from. And, it's not easy to work with, the pointers, all that kind of stuff. Drifted off into web development for a while, but I've always had interest in creating, native code, right? And I knew it was a pain. And finally I heard about Rust, and I thought, okay, this could be interesting. And that's kind of like where I started just taking a look at it, right? And then I was doing a consulting project for a client. And what I actually ran into is that, so I was using Elixir, right? And for those of you who don't know what Elixir is, it's a, how would you say, that's an actor-based kind of programming language. And I was parsing like thousands of XML files and creating PHP files, which is kind of weird, but it's what I was being paid to do. And it took about, I don't know, an hour and like 4 gigs of RAM. And yeah, every time it ran to sync some data and create the pages, I was getting a ping from IT saying that they think that the server's hacked. And I thought, okay, let me see if there's a better way to do this. And so I took a look at Rust, and I did what everybody should do, which is that completely write something in a whole other language that you never did before. And it worked out well. So then from then on, I went 10 seconds end to end with this like tens of megabytes of RAM. And so from then on, I knew that there was something there. That's kind of like my quick journey into Rust. For the podcast part, that's kind of a little bit longer story. I mean, are you sure you want to hear the whole story?
Absolutely, go ahead.
I feel like I'm taking all the time away from Marco, though. But so for that one, I was listening to Elixir Mix a lot, and they had an advertisement about, do you guys want to level up your career? And so, as every developer, I thought, okay, let's check this thing out. He was pitching this podcast training course. So I thought, okay, it could be interesting. So I took the course. I thought it was interesting. I thought I'd have a try. I did a podcast for Flutter, which is still going right now. And it seemed to work out quite well because I got to meet a lot of people. I got to learn more about the technology, and I got to get my voice out there, get my business out there. And then I thought, this is going quite well. Why don't I try this for Rust? And I remember listening to the Rustacean Station podcast, and they always had this kind of like plug in there saying that you can submit your own episodes because they want it to be a community podcast. And I just did, and doing interview podcasts is really easy. As you guys probably know, you don't need to prepare a lot other than trying to find the guest and schedule it. And that's kind of the start. And, from there, it's where we are today.
Right. So you weren't part of it since its inception. I think it was the first episode appeared in 2019, right?
My first episode with that, it should be during COVID sometime.
Yes, but when checking the RSS feed, the feed that contains all the podcast information for these people who do not do their own podcasts, essentially an RSS feed is something that your podcatcher picks up in order for you to be able to listen to the episodes. When I checked out the RSS feed, I noticed actually that the first episode went live somewhere around mid-2019, something like that. So when
2021 was mine.
Okay. Okay. So you got involved about 2 years later, give or take.
Yeah, it seems to be. So I did my first episode called Rust and Curl, and I talked with Daniel. What's his last name? The creator of Curl. I forgot his last name now. You know who I'm talking about, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Daniel Richter or something. He was on Rust in Production recently.
Who? Daniel?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that one. I didn't know Rust. I mean, there's more podcasts now, but there really was no other podcast, I think, or no other consistent podcast.
But before we forget Marco completely, Marco, why don't you tell your journey and how you also got involved with the podcast, by the way?
Yeah, sure. I don't really have a background in like native compiled code or so at all. My background is actually web development. I did Rails at this point 15 years ago or so maybe. Lots of Ruby then for a long time, Elixir as well. Then lots of JavaScript, front end stuff, and then I think Main Matter was founded around like 9 years ago. I think we have 10th anniversary next year. So
consultancy, right?
Yeah, right. That's the consultancy. So that was founded 9 years ago, and we continued doing Rails and JavaScript front end. And one of the things that we did is, or that we still do, is Ember.js, like kind of like a little bit exotic front end framework, maybe. But Ember.js happens to be the framework that Crates.io is built in. So some people on the team sort of got involved with maintaining Crates.io, like the front end part, and over time they got sort of more and more involved with the back end as well. And so that's how we got involved with Rust, because the backend obviously is Rust, right? And then sort of we worked with this more and more, and we sort of started liking it. We started seeing all of the benefits. I mean, we can maybe talk about those in detail later. And then we said, okay, why don't we sort of make that a real initiative for the company, right? Because Rust can actually help solve a lot of the problems that our Rails clients have, which is mainly reliability, maintainability. So that's when I think in 2022 or so, we kind of decided to make a real bet on Rust as a company. So we started sort of offering consulting services around it. We started doing workshops, and we started conference Eurorust. We should definitely talk about that in more detail later on. Also, we started recording some YouTube videos where sort of I just talked to different people sort of from the Rust ecosystem to share the word a bit, and sort of in particular focused on people that don't do Rust, or that sort of don't, or for which Rust is maybe not an obvious choice, right? Like Rails developers, like Python people, Elixir people, whatever. And then we shared those episodes on the Rustacean Station as well, and that's how I appeared on the podcast eventually.
Excellent. I wanted to come back to Alan about his first bit into Rust. I think you mentioned you were developing mainly in C and things like that, and then made your first journey into Rust that you talked about. How, from a let's say technical point of view, did you find that? Was that a big step? And how much time and effort did you put into moving over? I'm assuming you're still doing C programming as well. But how did you find that change?
You're talking about how to move over to Rust. Well, first, it was a fucking pain in the ass, right? Really. For anybody that's ever done Rust, I think it's always like that at the beginning, right? Because you have the compiler basically kicks your ass the entire time. Right? You're trying to code stuff, and then it doesn't work because it's forcing you to write in a certain way. So that was probably the most painful part. But good thing I wasn't writing anything too crazy, so it wasn't really that bad. And actually, I didn't write any asynchronous code, which is not too difficult, but it is a little bit more tedious.
Right.
Because actually, I was still using Elixir, because I can process every single file asynchronously by itself, its own process, its own green thread, basically. But the actual processing of the XML was in Rust. So I was using what's called a NIF, native implemented function, which would be using FFI. And I mean, that was the nice part. It is actually the integration between the two, which is using this library called Rustler. It works really great. I don't know, Marco, if you ever used that before or not, but it's really, really nice.
Before we go further, Alan, we should probably shed 2 cents out, shed a little bit of light on what the foreign function interface actually is before we lose our audience.
I mean, I'm always afraid I'm going to give the wrong definition. I tell you what I understand and how I would explain it. Obviously, is FFI would be a way that programming languages, as I would say, or APIs or different libraries, the way they can talk to each other. So if you have something written in Ruby and something written in something else, you can use FFI, which is kind of like a standard way to have these two languages talk to each other. That may or may not be correct, but usually you're going to do something that's like C plus some other language. So with Rust being basically a replacement for C, or most people would think that, there's a much better integration with that part.
The way I see a libFFI, the foreign function interface basically allows you to construct a mapping of your choice to a C-based library interface. Cut it short, essentially.
Well, it's like a wrapper, right? To
exactly.
Execution.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think we should leave it at that. Over to you, Marco.
What's the question again? Sorry. I'm not sure.
I was asking if you've ever used Rustler before, because you've also worked with Elixir and Rust.
Oh, Rustler, yeah. So we used that a bit. Yeah, like it works really well. I mean, you can do the same thing in Ruby as well, obviously, right? And I think the interesting thing around these NIFs and FFI, like in general, is sort of it's a really easy sort of entryway into Rust, right? Because typically, I don't know, you have an existing system, you have your Rails app, your Django app, your Phoenix app, and Elixir, whatever. You don't want to rewrite, right? You can never justify a rewrite, but like using a NIF is sort of a really nice way sort of to try out a little Rust, right, while keeping the application as such, and also obviously to make like things faster that need to be faster, right, like the XML to PHP that Alan mentioned earlier. But I think it's also sort of a really like low investment, low risk way of trying whether Rust works for you. So that's what we recommend to a bunch of like teams as well, sort of as a first step, essentially.
Yeah. So when you go to these consulting companies, I'm kind of curious because we're in a similar line of work. They have something written in something else, and say they need to squeeze more power out. You'd usually say, you wouldn't say rewrite a service in something else. You would say let's look at using some kind of FFI with Rust. Is that correct, or it depends?
I mean, it depends on what they have, I would say, right? If you have a huge Rails app, whatever, something is slow, something that is sort of computationally intensive is slow, right? Typically, things are slow because of data stores or so. But assuming something is slow that you can make faster with a NIF, right? Then I would say, sure, let's use Rust for that, right? If I don't know, if you have a microservices architecture already or so, I don't know, there's one server that needs to be faster, stability is absolutely critical or so, then that's the good, a good entry point for us. So I would say it really depends. I mean, sometimes also we have clients, and I think that's another very interesting aspect of Rust. We have clients that want to reuse the same code in different environments, right? So, and they're like Rust with WebAssembly sort of delivers on Java's broken promise, essentially, right? Like write once, run everywhere. So we did a project where sort of a client wanted to use the same code on the server, on an edge function, which is sort of a browser, and in an actual browser, right? So I think there's a lot of different sort of usages for us around web development in particular, and it always depends on where the client comes from. But I think with Rust, like with any other new technology, sort of you always have the problem of sort of the developers sort of want to adopt a new technology, right? But nobody can justify rewriting something that has been written over the last 15 years, right? It's a bit similar to Elixir, like I would say 8-9 years ago or so. Like all of the Ruby people wanted to do it, but I mean, nobody could justify rewriting all of these Rails apps.
This is the reason why most projects that I know, and I'm just talking about purely open source projects now, take a phased approach. For example, curl, as in the universally used URL obtainer, for want of a better expression. Basically, I think the way Daniel, if I'm not completely mistaken, that's his first name, did it. Basically, he replaced step by step parts of the old C code base with a new Rust implementation, tore the browser bundle, or sorry, not the browser bundle, but rather the original project. I started by replacing parts, if I'm not completely mistaken, parts of the protocol stack also with Rust, and slowly are migrating these kind of legacy code bases, for want of a better expression, step by step to Rust away from C or C++, depending.
So that's interesting.
Sure.
What you're talking about, sorry for butting in, because that was my first podcast episode, right, was with Daniel, and we talked about this. What I understand is that with curl, you have different, what he calls backends. So you can choose which quote unquote backend you want to use, which is kind of like the post processor, I suppose. And so the thing you're talking about is a different type of backend that you need to actually enable. Because like you said, it's quite new, relatively new compared to the other ones. And so it's something you have to opt into, and obviously it's not featureful. It's probably more featureful than before, but that's what that one is. And talking about the rewriting, actually, so that was sponsored by Prosimo, I believe, is the name of the project, but it's by the ISRG, Internet Research Group. I think that's the name. Those are the same people who run the free HTTPS certificate. They're also sponsoring Rust
yes.
TLS. Yeah, Rust TLS, and also one more thing which is interesting. And there's they have a couple other things too, including a rewrite of sudo using Rust. I can keep going if you want. I'm pausing to let you guys speak for a moment.
No, that's fine. No, I mean, exactly. I heard about that too. But then on the other side, you have, I'm almost tempted to say the opposite direction, where, and you see this, I think, in the Python world a good bit, where the existing tool chain, either written in C on a bad day, or actually written natively in Python, is also, I mean, I'm tempted to say complemented by Rust implementations. Can't remember of the exact name, but Pyodide, for example, in the Python world would be, I think, if I don't butcher that name, be one of the examples where the Python functionality is complemented by an implementation in Rust.
Yeah, and I mean, rewriting tooling is also in Rust is also something that's heavily done in the JavaScript world, right? Like all of the bundlers and TurboPeg by Mozilla and so on. Like all of the JavaScript tooling is rewritten in Rust as well, except for like 1-2 Go projects.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, the ES build I think he was trying to build that in Rust, and he just went to Go for some reason. Maybe it was easier for him. But yeah, there's quite a few that are Rust or written in Go, or written in Go. I think React just finally came out with a compiler. I believe that one's all written in Rust. There's another one called Isograph. Yeah, there's Isograph, which is another new one that I just interviewed with a couple of weeks ago. He wrote his in Rust because Facebook is writing their compiler in Rust for what is it? The thing that they have for the pagination, Relay. So they're doing a lot of Rust over there and rewriting all the tools in Rust, which is interesting.
Bringing it back to the podcast for a little bit. How do you choose your guests and topics? Is there a kind of a pattern that you have? I mean, ourselves, we obviously run a podcast as well. We've got the internal, external, in-depth and high-level and panel type things. Do you have a similar kind of format? How do you go about choosing or deciding what topics to address? And also, I guess it's a community podcast, right? So anybody can submit episodes, things like that. So can you shed a bit more light on how your podcast is organized as well?
Yeah. So for me, I kind of just buzz around on Reddit or what else, or just wherever kind of pops up. Sometimes I look through This Week in Rust, or recently a lot more people are actually reaching out to me saying we want to come on. I've gotten publicists contact me. I've gotten very random people trying to pitch random things to me also to come on. There's like these publishing or these podcasting companies that approach you with very weird people that have nothing to do with anything in technology space. So that's also interesting. But yeah, I think definitely a lot more people just come to me recently and they say, we want to come on, or I want you to talk with this person. Do you want me to introduce? I said, sure. That's mostly, that's more so this stuff recently. That's why things have been slowing down a little bit for me. Yeah, but I hope to get that going up again. But I think Marco also had quite a few, or you were involved with some episodes, as you said, right? How did you guys get yours? Because you guys did it in video format, right?
Yeah, right. So we recorded videos first. I mean, our focus is a bit on sort of trying to reach people that are not using Rust already, or that are maybe hesitant, right? Like I said before, people that have Rails apps or Elixir apps or so on. Sort of we mainly want to sort of address their concerns and the fear that they have of Rust, right? Like you said in the beginning, Alan, Rust is really like horrible in the beginning, right? It's like really hard. Compiler kicks your ass all the time, and so on. You might have no idea about sort of memory management, or what a compiler even is, what a linker is. Sort of suddenly you have to learn all of these things, but you have been doing JavaScript for the last 15 years, right? So you really have no idea. And we want to reach like those people mainly, and sort of like, and we do that by bringing on people that can share success rates, right? That say, hey, like we had like a horrible 4 weeks, but after that, sort of things have been like have been going really well with Rust, and sort of we've never been as productive, and things are super stable and so on. So we mainly focus on that versus sort of like talking to people from inside of the Rust community.
Interesting perspective. The question I have is actually, what's the governance model behind Rustacean Station? I thought that Alan was running it, but obviously I'm wrong.
Everybody thinks that. Even Main Matter, I think it was Lucas Palmieri reached out to me. He was like, "What do I need to do?" And I'm like, "Why are you asking me?" He's like, "Don't you run this?" I said, "No, I don't."
So who controls the RSS feed then?
That would be John, I think, is the main person, and second in command would be Ben Streakel. I mean, there's been a couple of episodes that I've been questioned about. Rightfully so, right? It's a Rustacean podcast, it's a Rust podcast, and sometimes they're like just related to Rust. So for instance, there was one episode that was recorded, and I thought it was a great episode because I'm the kind of person that I want to hear multiple sides of a story, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about how great Rust is. Okay, fine, but it can't be great for everything, right? Like I said before, there was the I think it was ESBuild or something similar, where they tried to do it in Rust, didn't quite work out. They went to Go, worked out. So that's the kind of people I want to hear from. Right? Why doesn't it work out? Because it's good for people to know when is it not good, right? And so I had one of those episodes. This is somewhat of a public conversation. You can see it on GitHub if you go to the Rustacean Station once. You can kind of see a little bit of talk of this. But I don't think I'm saying anything it's nothing against anybody, right? It's in the end, it's their podcast, and they need to have a limit, right, for how far you can drift from Rust, from the main topic, and that's fine. To me, like I said, I thought it was good. It was I forgot exactly what it was. There was this product that was released quite a few years ago, where it was basically zero downtime coding deployment. Forgot the name of the thing. I think it was written in C# originally, or something like that. Or no, sorry, it's actually written in OCaml. And then they switched. Then he tried to find the right programming language, and he really wanted Rust to work. He tried really hard to make it work, and it just didn't fit the product, or him, or both. It's been a while since we've done this, and so he chose, I think, F# in the end, which is interesting. But to me, that kind of story, I think, is powerful to present, like for the reasons I told you guys already. But because the product is proprietary, and there wasn't a lot of talk about Rust necessarily, other than him talking about it for why it didn't quite work out. They thought it wasn't a good fit, and that's fine. So I did release the episode on my own YouTube channel, just so it wasn't a waste of time. And I thought it was a good one. And then I also had as I mentioned, this library called Isograph. He came to Hong Kong. I did an in-person podcast interview. Isograph is this compiler that reads GraphQL, and it creates, I think, the request. Let me say this again. It reads this JavaScript code. He's got special syntax. It builds up the GraphQL query for you. And if you say add a field or remove a field within your code, it's going to add or remove the field to the query, which I think is quite nice. And the compiler is written in Rust. So that was the hook, is that the compiler is written in Rust. And he does discuss about why he uses Rust and what it's good at, what it's not good at, etc. But of course, the majority is we talk about GraphQL because not everybody knows about it. It's like we talked about FFI here. And there was some discussion about if it was fit, and luckily they think it fit. But like this is just some couple episodes that almost didn't make the cut for good reasons, right?
Interesting, because you released that episode this year, right? It's only a few months old.
Yeah. So I mean, there's this happened a couple of times, right? Again, I'm not saying anything bad about anybody. It's totally fine. there's times where I'm also questioning, like, is this the right fit? There's a connection with Rust. We don't talk about Rust a lot in it, but I think it's still interesting. That's why I still record the podcast. And so I have a private discussion with them in Discord, Ben and John, and we came to a conclusion that okay, it's okay. But like I said, there was just one episode that didn't get released, and that was the reasons why. And I think that's not anything necessarily secret. So that's why I'm willing to talk about that. I don't think it's a big deal.
No, it's interesting because, I mean, we have this attitude that whenever we see fit, basically, we drag on the show kicking and screaming. And whether that's actually Deborah, who's really not that technical, sorry, not Deborah, but rather Rebecca, who's not that technical, but vital in running the Rust Foundation, and more on the Rust Foundation in a minute, or whether it's Steve Klapnik, who's one of the earliest contributors, if not completely mistaken, of the language and so forth. It's just a mixture. And the sweet thing is basically, Martin and myself basically do it ourselves, and the ultimate say is with the two of us. But then we do not invite external contributors as such. We just have guests, like the two of you.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you have the final say, then you can do whatever you want. You can have, set it, forget it, that Ronco guy to come on here if you want it. Right? It's up to you. But yeah, I mean, it needs to be focused, and I think that's fine. The question always is, where do you draw the line? Because there was another episode that was released. I'm not going to say which one because it wasn't my episode, but I wouldn't mind to tell you. If it was mine, I would tell you fine, but it's not my episode. But interviewed somebody for a product that costs money, and there was some questions about if this is correct to release or not. And I think that's
okay.
Yeah, and I think that's an okay discussion to have because you can say, okay, if you want to sell something, let's say you have a book, is the episode talking about the technology that's in the book, or is it talking about buy the book? Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
That's the discussion that we had.
No, it's interesting.
Well, I mean, I said some stuff, but in the end, I don't have much of a choice. I just give my input, and they run the podcast, and that's fine. They're doing a great job. Again, nothing against them. I never thought it was a problem, but I understand their side, right? It's for developers, and developers, we don't like to pay for stuff, but unless it's really valuable. So
I mean, there are quite a few community podcasts out there who actually use the podcast as a vehicle. Talk Python is probably a good example because Michael Kennedy runs his own content production company and uses Talk Python actually to position the video courses that he does. Same thing to a lesser extent with Python Bytes, because as you may or may not know, Brian Ocken is the guy behind PyTest. And yes, he wrote books about PyTest, at least one of them, and also has a video course on Talk Python or the content production company run by Michael Kennedy. And if you listen to an episode, you'll be hard pushed maybe to miss this.
So that's the question, right? At what point is it a podcast episode or an infomercial?
Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to kind of taint Python Bytes or Talk Python here, because I think the content is quite relevant for the community. But you have that would be the different flavor. You just kind of hinted at. And Michael Kennedy and Brian Orkin do not draw the line. Martin, where do we draw the line? Once people give us money, right? Then we don't do this stuff.
Well, that hasn't happened yet. We don't have to worry about that one. No, but
exactly.
the benefit of not having any of that stuff is that, as we already said, we can decide who's coming on and the depth of the topics to cover. And yes, we've had some more kind of. I think one of the Confluent people was on, right? Been more of a let's say advocate for the technology type stuff, which is fine, but as long as they're not plugging the company too much, that's the main thing. It's after all an open source podcast, and stick with those topics. Yeah.
Speaking of,
I heard you guys are getting paid not to talk about something. Is what I heard in one of your episodes.
Yes,
that
correct.
sounds good.
Yes. Spot on, Alan. Spot on. Yeah, quite the opposite of sponsoring, actually. If you wanna exclude something from the podcast,
What
send
would
us
you call
money.
that? Non-sponsorship, or what would you call that?
Yeah, something like that, actually. I think the proper word is hush money.
Oh,
Anyway, just changing tack a little bit, over to much more. What's the word I'm looking for? Innocent subjects. Speaking of the foundation now, Marco, I noticed actually that main matters, and please feel free to just plug the company a tiny bit. Is actually one of the founding members. So
Yep. Yeah.
why don't we talk? Yeah.
A silver member, I think. I'm
Silver
not
member,
entirely
okay.
sure what our title is, but not founding member for sure.
Okay.
Like we're a small member that came in later.
So maybe you can shed some light on why did you choose to join the foundation and what you get out of it in return, to use blunt commercial terms now. And no, jokes aside. And where do you see this going? And where do you see this going? The Rust Foundation, of course.
Yeah. I mean,
we should probably position the foundation just a tad bit for those people who do not know who or what the Rust Foundation is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether I could even say in one sentence. I mean, I think the idea is sort of the foundation is sort of an entity that works on sort of ensuring the long-term success of the Rust project, right? In like whatever ways. As you might or might not know, it's also kind of the foundation is also like a bit of a difficult topic in the ecosystem, like some other topics as well. So I don't even think I want to talk about the foundation too much. So in general, I can say, so we're a member of the Rust Foundation. We're also a member of and actually founding member there of the Ecosystem Foundation. We're a sponsor of the Ember.js project. So that is kind of like our general thing as a company, as consultancy is we want to sort of be active members of the communities around or behind the technologies that we sort of specialize in, right? And I mean, the reasons for that there are multiple reasons. I mean, first of all, obviously it gives us some exposure, right? If our logo appears on the websites, it allows us to support the technologies or the ecosystems and communities as such, right? Which is both a good thing and also a thing that we have an interest in as a company, because if we specialize in technologies, we need to make sure that these technologies sort of stay around for some time, right? That's really why we do that. I mean, to be fair, the investment for small memberships like ours is like relatively low, right? It's not like we're spending like large percentages of our revenue on that or whatever. So it's not a really hard decision, and I think it's good, right? I think it allows us sort of to be an active member. We are involved to some extent in some of the conversations also that happen sort of inside and around the foundation, which is good. So we do have like a tiny bit of influence regarding where things are going and so on. But I mean, yeah, in general, it's kind of a like we just want to be an active part, right? So that's why we join these foundations and try to have a little influence and like give a little input on some topics.
Now it's interesting for those people who don't know where the foundation comes from. Basically, pretty much like the language. Actually, it's a spin-off of something called Mozilla. Mozilla founded the whole thing, and then Mozilla did some things, and we won't go into the details because if you use a search engine of your choice, you will come across the history of this. And then the foundation was pretty much spun out of Mozilla as such. And needless to say, and we don't have to discuss the details, the foundation has not been without controversy as of late. The copyright thing is probably the best example here.
Yeah, one example among others, I think. But like I said, I wouldn't suggest we have like in detail discussion about about the foundation.
Onto much safer grounds. Alan, what do you make of the event scene? And Marco, that goes for you as well, because I think either one of you or both of you have been involved in past event organizing, right? As in organizing of past events.
And future events as well.
And future events.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about events now in general? Exactly. Marco, you've been involved in Europe, in Euro Rust, right? If not completely mistaken.
Yeah. So we started Eurorust essentially with the help of the Rust Fest people, right? So like a few years ago there was Rust Fest as its own conference, and then the Rust Fest folks sort of stopped organizing the conference themselves, and they turned Rust Fest into sort of a meta organization, right? So they support several events, and one of those is Eurorust, because in 2022, when we sort of started to get like really involved with Rust, we recognized there wasn't a conference, right? It wasn't really surprising because it was also kind of short after COVID or during COVID or wherever you want to draw the line. So we said, okay, why don't we do a conference, right? And then we did the first Eurorust in Berlin with the help of the Rust Fest people. Then last year we went to Brussels, sort of already twice the size from sort of Berlin. I think we're 450 people on site or so. And this year we'll be in Vienna. So the idea is to have a traveling conference, obviously, right? Different city in Europe every year, and this year we'll be in Vienna October 10 and 11. So if anyone listening to this does not have the ticket yet, I would suggest to get it soon, because it is gonna sell out again.
Yeah, details, of course, will in the show notes, people. But I reckon that's not the only event happening on the planet. I mean, there's a couple of conferences in the US, if not completely mistaken, and soon in Asia, I hear, Alan?
Yeah, so for me, I'm in Hong Kong, right? I think I've mentioned that quite a few times on the podcast. I don't know about this one, but in Hong Kong, because of the recent situations that happened over here, we kind of lost a lot of talent, and but it's coming back. Anyways, there is quite a few people over here doing Rust, and I'm trying to get to know those people over here. I was trying to get to know them. And I've been asking, hey, why don't we start up some kind of, group? People said, yeah. Nobody ever did it. So I've just started up the Rustacean, Hong Kong Rustaceans or something like that. I forgot the name exactly. So we have a meetup group over here. So if you guys are coming into Hong Kong, feel free to drop in. Just drop me a message. We can probably make an impromptu event, and it's fine. The other thing, too, is because I'm in Hong Kong, of course, I want more stuff to happen in Asia. I see Asia as as stuff that, there's stuff happening over here, especially in Singapore, etc. But because I'm in Hong Kong, I want stuff to come to Hong Kong or be close to Hong Kong. So I went ahead and I started up, what's it called? I think it's called, Rust Asia Conference. We really accentuate the Asia part, because I really want to make this about Asia. And so we are doing a conference end of this year, November 29th. In Hong Kong. Okay. I'll leave a link in the show notes for you guys. We already have 2 sponsors. We have Rust Foundation and Ferris Systems. And so, if you guys are interested, if you guys are interested in sponsoring, or main matter, if you guys are interested in sponsoring,
we'll reach out afterwards.
Yeah, definitely if you can, because really, Hong Kong is a great place to come to. We're really open. And if you're looking to get into China or whatever, this is really the gateway to get into China. It's the easiest place to get to, and there's a lot of companies over here. So we're also trying to compete with in crypto market, which most of the stuff's using Rust nowadays. So there's a lot of Rust people over here.
Talking about China, how is the Rust adoption over there, since you're right next door to them?
So even though I'm right next door, it's kind of a little bit like an iron curtain to a certain extent. Yeah. I know that they do have quite a few Rust conferences, actually. I talked to one of the Rust China conference organizers somewhat recently, because I was put in touch to them from Rebecca, the head of the foundation. So they're doing a couple of events over there, like basically Shenzhen, which is across the border, Shanghai and Beijing, those places. So it's quite popular. I know a guy working at Siemens, and they're using Rust, and he's based in China, so they're definitely doing stuff. There's Huawei, right? And there's quite a few stuff. ByteDance, I think, is also doing some Rust stuff. So there's quite a lot of Rust.
Yeah, we had Huawei as the sponsor for the live stream at last year's Eurorust, right? And at some point they told us that in China there was apparently like 10,000 engineers or so watching the live stream, and we decided to not tell the speakers to not to intimidate them too much.
Interesting. Okay.
Nice.
But at the moment there are no plans to branch out that Hong Kong conference onto mainland China. Not yet.
No, I mean they have their own, right? If there's a need and so forth, I'm open to that. But let's see if this is even a success, right? Because it's an uphill battle. I mean, I'm lucky I'm doing the podcast, or else I wouldn't have as many people's ears, literally. Just from knowing people, I wouldn't have that many people to listen to. So I'm kind of lucky in that stance. That's why I can probably do something. I don't know if I'm going to succeed. I mean, what's the definition of success? Actually, I don't even know. At least one person buying a ticket, I guess, is a good measurement. But I think I'll have a good turnout, to be honest. But I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done, right? I've never done a conference before, full disclosure, but there's plenty of people whom I can ask for help if I need it. Yeah, and that's the funny thing about conferences. It's kind of like, maybe I'm being too generalized, but it's kind of like the Marines, right? You go through boot camp, aka you go through making, the conference, and you bond with people, right? So I think that there's more than enough people out there who are willing to help, or at least minimum give advice and good advice. So I think we'll pull it off. We may have a loss, but let's see how it goes. Maybe that's going to spark something, like domino effect, where the year after that, it's going to be a much bigger success. I mean, since you've done conferences before for Eurorust, I mean, do you know about the first time or first couple of times? How was it? I mean, how is it now? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Is it like a roller coaster? How has it been for you?
Yeah. I mean, the first one is always the hardest, obviously, right? Because I mean, depending on how optimistic you are, you might be over-optimistic, and then everything turns out to be way more work than you thought. But probably you have to be over-optimistic, because otherwise sort of you don't dare to organize a conference anyway. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but you learn a lot, right? So the next year it's easier. I mean, depending on how the economy goes, the next year could still sort of financially be harder or not, right? I mean, last year wasn't particularly great overall. This year things seem a bit better. I'm not sure, like maybe in China it's a bit different or so, but I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a roller coaster, but sort of you continue learning every year, right? So in that sense, it gets easier every year, but there might be other factors that might make it harder again. Yeah, but I mean, you need to get started, right? And then once you're going, sort of, you get positive feedback, ideally, right? So it's also very rewarding in a way.
Word of advice, Alan. Full disclosure, I've participated in quite a few large-scale open source events in Germany, both as a speaker, organizer, and media relations manager. And I mean, these are conferences that attract more than 2,000 people over a weekend. Not quite as large as FOSDEM, needless to say, but not small either in the German context. And not sure about the size of Eurorust or the plan or the size of the conference you plan on having, but such an event you can only do with a team, and do not underestimate the effort that goes into this. Not just running the event, but also kind of prepping for the event, marketing, all the rest of it. Especially if you're doing this for the first, second, or third time, because in that case, you probably have a lot of effort to put into marketing and publicizing the event as such. And I reckon every little bit helps if you want to kind of promote or organize the event. That would be my kind of 2 cents on the whole thing.
Yeah, now that you mention it, it's already in the back of my mind, but I have a really great administrative assistant, or whatever you want to call her. She does everything, right? And she's been instrumental in terms of basically squeezing as much as we can out of every dollar. It's really been useful. Like we were going to get this event place, and it was crazy expensive, but we checked, couldn't find it. Finally, we found an extremely cheaper venue, because I think it's like the innovative department of the government that's trying to attract people to come over, and so they gave us a very great deal on stuff, and we can even get more stuff if we want to. So we definitely have very good staff, and I have a designer on board who can help design all the banners and everything. And I got and the best part of being in Hong Kong is I have the factory right next door, so I can print whatever the hell I want to print for a good price. So it's definitely a great location to be at for this kind of stuff, because I have great staff, great location for everything, and I think in general, I think I can squeeze out quite a bit of niceness out of it.
That's the setting you want to have, yes.
And if the printer prints on bad, honestly, I just go across the border and I can find them myself. It's not hard for me.
Yeah, so clearly you're both very active in the Rust community with conferences and the podcasts and things, and your consultancies. From the the consultancy point of view, how is that that growth? How are you seeing that growth with the people that you work with over the last few years? Is Rust still on that trajectory of being the most popular language? Is it tailing off? How are you in the field seeing how that's working out for Rust?
I think it depends on the industry, right? I think like there's a pretty wide range across industries in terms of sort of how much adoption has proceeded already. I think there's obviously there's the big tech companies, AWS, Microsoft, Google, and so on. They use it relatively heavily already, I think, right? You have embedded automotive and that sector, like all of the previous users of C++. I think they are a bit ahead of sort of the sector that we are mostly interested in, like I said, sort of web backend development and so on. I think there it's still relatively at the beginning, but I would say it's going in the right direction. I mean, we hear from more and more companies that use Rust that actually confirm all of the things that everybody has been saying for years, right? So if you come for the performance and efficiency, and you stay for the reliability and maintainability. So there's more and more success stories, and so if you need those success stories to sort of convince other companies to try out Rust as well. But then, like we said before, you always have the situation where, so if you have, you have massive investments that you made over the last 10, 15 years in building systems and other technologies, right? You don't just rewrite them. So I think there's always naturally, there's a little bit of a phase where maybe everybody sort of understood it already, they should be switching, but sort of you have to wait for the right moment to switch. It's definitely getting easier and easier and easier to switch because I don't know, the language as such maybe, but also the ecosystem, obviously, right? It's getting more and more mature. So I'm really optimistic that, as I said, particularly in backend development, things will go in the right direction. I mean, another field that I didn't talk about, because I'm not a fan. I guess many people are not fans, like all the crypto Web3 stuff and so on. I mean, there has been a lot of Rust adoption, and there is a lot of Rust usage for sure. But I mean, hard to say how sustainable that's going to be in many ways, I think.
And we even didn't touch upon WASM, right, as in WebAssembly.
Yeah, no, that's a big topic as well, I think, right? Like I said before, right? Like Rust sort of can actually deliver on Java's broken promise there, I think. I was a bit skeptical in the beginning when we sort of got to work with Rust, but I do think now that there's quite a bit of potential. In particular, with all of the sort of edge function stuff. Not so much the browser, maybe.
Okay. And do you share that sentiment in general?
For everything that he said, or just about the last part?
No. In general, that is. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, for what I experience is that most of the clients I'm working with, they have problems and they want us to solve their problems, and we get to choose how we solve the problem. That's most of the experience I've had. Very few times where they come in and say, we want this particular piece of technology. I don't know if you guys may matter, if Marco, if you guys have the same situation or not, if there's a ratio, if you have that or not. It sounds like maybe you're doing more like joining a team. Is that right?
I mean, we do have.
Go ahead.
We do have a lot of clients that come to us because of Rust, because they want to use Rust, right? But they don't feel comfortable on their own necessarily. I guess that's also because we do a bunch of workshop, right? We do a lot of training, so it's kind of like you have decided you want to use Rust. You don't feel if you're comfortable doing it on your own. You come to us for training, and then there might be a consultant project afterwards. I mean, my experience is still sort of in situations where kind of you have a problem, you want to solve a problem, like whatever, you have a proxy server, whatever, right? Like high throughput needs to be super stable and so on. In these kinds of situations where Rust would still be like a rather obvious fit, I still see some teams being a bit hesitant. Because I mean, Rust still has the image of being hard to approach, and sort of, I don't know, they might be a Java shop, whatever, right? Can they even convince their Java people to learn Rust? Would they even be interested in learning Rust? So I do think there's still a bit of hesitance, but I think that is also going to go away and get less and less over the next years.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, as I said before, we focus mostly on the problems. There's a couple of times where we augment, and a couple of times because we do these technologies, then they will, like you said, they come to you for that. But I would say majority is they got a problem, we got to solve it. And I choose those three technologies. I repeat what they are. They're Elixir, Flutter, and Rust, right? So how I usually use those is I use Flutter for apps, for the front end. Mostly it's for mobile apps. But we actually built a trading system for our clients, and we used it for a desktop app, which is kind of cool. The Rust part, usually I use that just to augment the system to make it faster in certain pieces, as I discussed in my first part. And then usually Elixir does most of the stuff that we need. I'm not sure if you guys know much about Elixir or not. I can talk just a little bit about it because we keep talking about it, but not really explain what it is. If anybody, should I go talk a little bit about it, or
2 sentences will do the trick.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't even know how to say anything about it. It's a technology that was built for running telephone systems. So it needs to be able to handle lots of concurrency and lots of connections and do lots of things at the same time. So that's why it's really suitable for a lot of systems.
It sounds like
Erlang. That's kind of the short bit. It's built on top of Erlang. Yeah.
Martin, of course, being the
right.
MQ fanboy between the two of us.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So, anyways, you're right. So that was actually describing Erlang, which in turn Elixir runs on top of. So that's why it fits for most of our clients, and that's why we usually go for that one. Plus, developing apps using Elixir Phoenix is so much easier, I think, than the web scene in Rust. I know that they have something similar to what Elixir has, which is this live view thing. I've heard that they have something similar, but I haven't seen it yet. Marco, have you seen something like that or no? I heard they have something.
Yeah, I heard something about that as well, but I don't know the details. Yeah.
Yeah,
but I mean, like I said, sure, like in Ruby and Elixir and so on, it's certainly still easier sort of to get something, that works, right? But I'm also not sure whether like Phoenix and Rails and whatever framework you want to use in Rust sort of are direct competitors as much as like Rails and Phoenix are, for example. Right? I'm not sure that you would be looking at Rust for the same use cases necessarily anyway.
Probably not.
The one complaint I have about Rust is that there's really too many choices, and that's what makes it a little bit difficult. to choose like which web framework should I use.
Yeah, have you ever looked at
Sure.
Python or JavaScript in that context?
JavaScript, yes. Python is quite more clear, right? You used Flask or Django for the most part. I haven't heard of anything else.
There's
There might be more
Pyramid.
things.
Yeah. Oh, there are quite a few to choose from too in Python. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Isn't there also Fast API or something weird like that? Yeah, but for the most part, you choose the two I mentioned. I'm not really in the Python scene so much, but that's how I see it. I think for Ruby, it's usually Rails, and then there's Sinatra, if Sinatra's still a thing. But that's the one thing that still bugs me a little bit about Rust. It's like, which one should I use? It's really tricky, but no matter what you're using Hyper, usually. So that's the other thing that's nice.
So if you want to have help with choosing your right web framework, the company to call is Main Matter.
Main Matter.
And before we lose our last listener, maybe now is the time to come to the proxies. Proxy, of course, being the wrap-up format that we normally use. So anything that has crossed your path, Marco and Alan, over the last couple of weeks, which you think worth mentioning, now's the time. The running gag, of course, is that Mark normally goes into the details of Amish adult entertainment websites. I normally mention books, TV series, whatever. But it's really kind of up to you to take your pick. So let's start with Marco.
I can only think of something that might be a bit boring because it's something that we did and that relates to us, but it's still good, I think, and people should know about it. So we did a Rust workshop, right, for beginners. So we've learned Rust in 4 days, and we put all of the exercises online for free. It's like all open source, the entire workshop, rust-exercises.com. We put it online yesterday, I think, and have gotten quite some positive feedback. So I think it's actually helpful for people to check out rust-exercises.com.
So 4 days, that means 96 hours, and that gives a crash course on into Rust. Excellent.
Yes.
Perfect.
Nice.
Alan, over to you.
Yeah, for me, I'm again, you see I'm a big Elixir guy. There's a really awesome library called Ash. I don't know if Mark, have you heard of Ash before or no?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Like Ash against evil, that sort of thing?
Yeah, basically the same Ash, but different Ash.
Okay.
Sadly, there's no chainsaw arm that would definitely would seal it.
Too bad.
Yeah, so basically, we all know you're basically building the same a lot of the same plumbing every time you make an app, right? So the idea of this Ash framework is it takes all the popular libraries within Elixir, such as Ecto, Phoenix, the GraphQL one, Absinthe, all this kind of stuff, and you just basically configure your app using this DSL. I know DSLs could be tricky, but what I like about it is that it makes it so much easier to really build apps now and to add APIs. You can, with the same code base, you can slap a GraphQL API, you can slap a JSON API on it, which is a couple lines of code, and it just makes life so much easier. So if you guys are doing Elixir, I highly recommend you guys check it out. Really awesome library. I've been playing around with it recently.
And no chainsaws inside, apparently. Good news.
I'll talk with the creator about that one. Let me see what he can do.
Ash Against Evil, of course, refers to some sequel, prequel, whatever you want to call it. It's a TV series, and there's also a couple of movie franchises. Details, of course, will be the show notes. It's somewhat of a cult, let's put it this way. It used to have a huge following, but you're talking about at least 15, 20 years back, that sort of thing. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't got one this week because
Fair enough.
I've been kind of busy. So.
Okay, no, fair enough. Over to my box. It's actually a TV series called Mozart in the Jungle. If that rings a bell with regards to the famous Austrian composer, you're not too far off. It's a TV series about a orchestra in New York, and the sitcom aired between 2014 and 2018 on Amazon, if I'm not completely mistaken. And it talks about the shenanigans of said New York Symphony Orchestra. Now, if you think this sounds boring in terms of that's the TV series you want to watch if you can't go to sleep, you couldn't be more mistaken. I won't give away too much, but drugs, sex, and some other shenanigans play a very important role in that TV series, plus the fact that it's hilariously funny. IMDb gives it, I think, either 7 or 8 stars. I'm tempted to say to give it rather close to 9. And with that, Marco and Alan, thank you much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
And hopefully speak to you at some stage soon in the future when Rust finally has conquered the world. This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.